to have you join us. So pleased to have you join us for our April 2022 LP update. Our updates are meant to cover topics on supply chain and also updates on our investments, and most importantly, have a lively discussion about things that matter to us in supply chain. So we'll kick it off with the agenda. We're going to do a quick strategy update before we roll into the portfolio update, our fundraising update, and then of course the macro environment for supply chain tech, and then our open session with Q&A. Our supply chain community, of course, many of you are familiar with it, but we have been building this community since 2017, and we're really proud of our 4,000 plus members, 40,000 innovators, builders and buyers around the world. And we really started building our fund starting with community. But our latest addition is an operating company. So I'm an operator who learns by building. It has proven to be an immense advantage to our fund and its portfolio companies to have a separate but partnered operating company that is focused on orchestrating localized infrastructure upon which all of our companies can scale. Thanks to REFASHIOND OS, we have a unique understanding of the hurdles to adoption, access to bought-in early adopters, and can leverage our access where it can benefit the scaling of our investments. We believe this is one of the huge reasons why founders choose us. We literally live, breathe, and sleep supply chain. Brian and I were talking about that quote earlier today, but it really is true. Every moment of our lives is about supply chain, and yes, Brian and I actually do dream supply chain. I'm hoping that some of you amongst our audience are similar to us in that regard. But for seed stage supply chain tech startups, REFASHIOND Ventures is proving to be the world's first fund powered by a grassroots driven network of people who understand that the world's future depends on technology driven innovation in global supply chains. We put this network of corporate executives, venture funds, academics, industry subject matter experts, technologists, government agencies, and institutional investors to work for the good of startups in our portfolio, as well as for the good of the community. We lead with our values and have a proprietary scoring system for all our investments that includes diversity, culture, impact, fair labor, and more. We feel it's important to measure what matters to ensure you are aligned on the intended outcomes. Our portfolio definitely reflects our values, but more importantly, our network. One of the reasons that diversity matters is that you tend to attract attracts like, and Brian and I, being Ghanaian and Puerto Rican, tend to have a very diverse network, and we're proud to say that our portfolio reflects that. Our current rolling fund portfolio as of March 31st, you can see amongst these shiny, happy faces of amazing founders, the diversity. Our rolling fund has allowed us to build our partnered track record, and our $25,000 check investments have proven to punch above their weight class. We're being sought out and kept in $20 million plus deals that have been born through our community, or like with green screens, have had the likes of Tiger Global keep us in the round they led. Our global network brought us the Singapore-founded Arcstone, which is a platform creating integrated real-time data for visibility in manufacturing. We co-led their $2.5 million raise to help them move their HQ to the US by facilitating key intros to enterprise customers who have anchored their US presence in heavy industrial manufacturing. Our operating company, REFASHIOND OS, has been actively kicking the tires on their tech and is going to help them enter the textiles and fashion manufacturing market as the backbone of REFASHIOND OS's vertically integrated, made in the USA, fiber to finished apparel demand chain. We have monthly calls with their head of product and CEO to provide feedback on the UX, UI, and product roadmap. And recently, actually last week, I brought Wilson out to a knitting factory, 100,000 square foot knitting factory in Long Island City to help him enter this new vertical. Obviously, heavy industrial and fashion and textiles are very different markets. So we're literally opening up a whole new market for them here in the US. And here's our latest portfolio companies. So Stimulus, you may recall if you saw our last LP update, they were in technically Q4 of 2021, but we had warehoused the deal and now have brought her into Q1 2022. Stimulus is building a B2B platform that enables large enterprises to better manage their supplier and vendor relationships. Stimulus unlocks SMB vendors that rise to meet the enterprise criteria as a viable partner. CRMs are great at keeping tabs on established relationships, but procurement needs to constantly discover new suppliers and vendors to diversify their procurement, to meet their D&I targets, and to stay on top of emerging technologies. Stimulus solves for all of the above. We spoke a little bit about Arcstone already. They're the first company that REFASHIOND has actually co-led investment. We did so because we were confident that our network could help them make the move from Singapore to the US market. A lot of companies, as Brian and I believed from day one, every company around the world that is in supply chain wants to do business within the US market. This is the first deal that we were able to literally help move from another country into the US. The Arcstone platform drives real-time visibility from the factory floor to across a distributed network of manufacturing suppliers and partners. And as I mentioned, we recently went out to that facility in Long Island. Their existing deployments being industrial machinery, manufacturing, and automotive. Synthetics. Synthetics is near and dear to my heart because it happens to be our very first Latina founded company investment. They have created, well, they started in a different space, working with chemistry to create materials from sun, hence the name synthetics. And they now have realized that the most valuable asset that they were building is actually a tool that they were using to help accelerate their speed to market with chemistry. And that platform is a machine learning software platform capable of leveraging smaller data sets to generate insights for product development in the chemicals industry. They have seen accelerated speed to market with better data to support it by up to 80%. And green screens, I'm going to toss over to Brian, who has been silent.
So Green Screens is an AI and machine learning company, and they're developing a neutral dynamic pricing infrastructure for the truckload spot market. This is a market in which the state of the art in terms of technology for pricing is email and Excel spreadsheets and phone calls and gut instinct. And so what Green Screens is doing is moving that market into the 21st century, much like happened in the financial services market many decades ago. This is the investment that was led by Tiger Global. And once we heard it was being led by Tiger Global, I thought we would lose our spot, but fortunately, we were kept in the round.
It's a huge claim to fame. They didn't kick us out. We're easily amused by small wins. Our last portfolio company that was in Q1 2022 is in Stealth. But what we can disclose is that it is a Black female-founded company in logistics that raised over $8 million in their, it was seed, right?
Yes, it was a seed round.
Not pre-seed, seed round. So I'm thrilled. It was oversubscribed by top funds out of Silicon Valley, and I think she may be the largest seed raise by a Black female founder ever. So I'm
Yeah,
I'm I'm thinking we might be able to make that claim to fame.
claim. Yeah, yeah,
Let's see. So the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation, now we're into just general updates. Our global community has a pretty big update that has been a long time coming. We're going to be back in person. Woo! So I know that I love seeing all of your familiar faces joining into this Zoom, but I personally cannot wait to see you filing into this space and meet us in person for our next upcoming event, the New York Supply Chain Meetup. And you guessed it, the title for that event is Supply Chains Are Effed. It is our 36th event for the New York Supply Chain Meetup and will be on June 16th at SAP Hudson Yards. We are currently looking for speakers, specifically in food and energy and what were the other topics? Or categories, Brian?
logistics, but logistics we might be able to find someone. But food, energy, consumer products, someone at the director level or higher who can talk about some of the issues that companies faced.
Yep.
And we'll be putting out a more formal announcement call for speakers soon on social media.
And you will be able to share this beautiful graphic, which has it's an image in the background of all of the ships at a port in China. It's really, truly insane. They're literally stacked ships on ships, and thought it perfectly summed up this theme. We have another huge announcement. The Southern California Supply Chain Meetup has launched after having their inaugural event, which was hugely successful. Tony Ann Correcchio, a member of our New York Supply Chain Meetup community, who is a co-founder of this Southern California Meetup, she has created tons of video footage and clips that have proven to be a huge hit on LinkedIn. This one in particular about empty container returns being a big problem received about 20,000 views after posting. And if you're curious, we will be sending out this deck, which has links, so you can actually click on this to see their entire video library on YouTube, or go to this logo and click to sign up to attend in person if you're in Southern California. Funds that we co-invest alongside. This is expanding pretty rapidly. We're really proud of being in such esteemed company. Brian and I, or at least I couldn't have imagined that we would have some of these names alongside us in our deals when we first set out on investing in supply chain. The good news is more and more people are realizing the opportunity in this space that we know and love, and deploying tons of capital, which you'll see later in the presentation. We need it badly. Any other comments you wanted to make on our co-investing VCs, Brian?
No, it's a list that's growing. It's a list that's growing by the day. So
Our fundraising update. So our rolling fund, woohoo, we can talk about. It's over. We finally hit over the $1 million mark in, was that capital
and
committed or
committed
closed?
and committed capital. And committed capital.
And we have officially done 15 deals that have closed since July of last year. So just 2 new deals have closed in April, and we have tons more in the pipeline. Frankly, it comes down to having to pick and choose which deals we can get into each quarter, so that we are trying to game when the actual deal will close, and if it falls in this quarter or next quarter. I feel like we're always borrowing from Peter to pay Paul because we have so much amazing deal flow that we want to invest in. So we do have new LPs signing on every quarter, and I'm really excited to say that we've had a couple of new female LPs that are first-time LP investors. Amazing to see so many women with accreditation being able to invest in this new asset class. We call on all of you, if you've enjoyed and believe in the types of deals we've been doing, to consider upping your quarterly contribution and or extending another 4 quarters. And of course, introductions to new LPs are always welcome. And a new LP really can be anyone that in your network that you know meets the accreditation standard. Institutional fund. So this is an area that we have realized, because it's not a 506c, we cannot talk about publicly. We're currently raising, so come talk to us. That's about all we can say. We can say that we have been admitted into a number of the top programs for emerging fund managers, including Recast Capital, NAIC, and Revere VC. And Revere has actually put together a comprehensive report on the funds that they have admitted into their program. Their website is going to be launching shortly, and we can't wait to be featured on their homepage, along with our in-depth report. They do a number of different categories on how they're rating and ranking these emerging fund managers. And we are really proud to say that our ratings are really high. Out of 5, we're at, I forget our overall score, but we're in the top percentage of emerging funds. All righty, now into the macro environment. Our world is blowing up, and supply chains are certainly in the middle of it. Russia and Ukraine has added to the global shit show that has been supply chains, but adding in the additional complex layer of the humanitarian crisis, human trafficking, and on top of it, the impact of all the food that is produced in this region that is going to be difficult to access. We have food supply chains like wheat, where it's 30 to 40% of the world's production coming from this region. Auto, we have all the manufacturers in Eastern Europe, energy costs, and inflation because of crisis upon crisis. We actually have somebody on our call who is currently in Poland on her way to Ukraine because she's built a platform called RefAid that helps to do the matching, the complex matching of all the supplies and things that everyone around the world is wanting to donate to support this humanitarian crisis, and matching them with the actual vetted nonprofits and government orgs that can help make sure they get to the people in need on the ground. I don't know if Shelley, you can unmute yourself and maybe say a few words. I'm sure everyone on the call would be in awe to learn what you've been up to.
Can you hear me? I'm unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you, Shelley.
Great. Sorry, there's a little bit of traffic sound because we're filming as I'm driving. So actually, we got started with our RefAid app in 2016 to help the Syrian refugees who were coming into Europe in huge numbers. We never thought we would see anything like this in Europe, but because we had this app that allowed nonprofits and government aid organizations to publish their services into a mobile app where people could find the help they needed nearest to them, that became something that was super important in the recent Ukraine crisis, where the numbers are similar. There were 7 million Syrian refugees, 7 million Venezuelan refugees. The only big difference is the fact that they were so many so quickly. We've never seen that in history. And so one of the problems we started seeing after we kind of ramped up for Ukraine and the border countries, we were already all the way through Europe, but one of the things that we saw is the horrible problem that the big aid organizations were having in sourcing big quantities of supplies like medical supplies and bandages and food and even water bottles. And that kind of led to a big aha moment where I thought, you know, we're already acting as a marketplace for service providers to be able to list and map and manage their services for the end user, the refugee. But what if we were to create a logistics hub where we had all of the organizations who needed help, large quantities, and all of the organizations, including governments in the private sector, who could offer the help, be on the same platform in a multi-entity, cross-border way, so that this kind of matching an eBay for huge humanitarian supplies could work. And then we realized we needed one more component, which is the transportation companies that make it possible, the logistics companies. So we created this hub where I'm calling it a coalition, but it's actually software that makes the coalition possible, so that all of these aid organizations, those who have supplies and those who can offer to transport the supplies, can all be in the same place together and do everything but the actual financial transactions that take place. So that's what we've just finished configuring over the last couple of weeks, and we're very excited to see that going live this week and next week.
And who do you have as your partners currently in this coalition?
So we
Don't forget to
have
shout out some big names.
some big names. So one people might not know, but the World Cargo Alliance is the largest association of logistics companies in the world, with 10,000 members, meaning 10,000 logistics companies, trucks and whatever, all kinds of shipping all over the world. So they're there as a key partner, although we're inviting others in. We're talking with Amazon Global Logistics, who hopefully will be another one of the key logistics partners, as well as a source of donations. We have Microsoft and AWS, and we have the Humanitarian Logistics Association as partners. But it is an open coalition. Those are the ones who just got in early. So we're open to any other of those primary actors who can help deliver humanitarian aid from one place to another, whether it's this war or any natural disaster or any situation where the crisis requires everyone to jump in.
Thank you so much, Shelley. And I
Thank
will
you.
just personally put my info out there. If anyone on the call has any resources to help or support the humanitarian efforts in Ukraine, feel free to direct message me and I will get you in touch with Shelley. All of these resources coming at the orgs that are trying to manage them from every angle just creates further crisis and chaos. And like we saw with Hurricane Maria, months and actually over years after the hurricane, there were whole pallets and warehouses discovered of food and water that were just never distributed. And it's a crisis on top of the crisis.
We're working on planning an event in May where Shelley and Ben Gordon and others who are working on various efforts towards the crisis in Russia and Ukraine can tell us about what they're up to.
Yep.
Lisa, I'm wondering if, since the rest of the conversation is the macro environment, should we open up for questions from,
Yes,
especially
we
since
love,
we're down to 20 minutes.
yeah,
20 minutes left.
we love our community, so feel free to chime in, unmute yourself. I know I'm going to call on Mr. Supply Chain because he happens to be
He's
featured on this
featured
slide.
here.
So China, yeah, Mr. Supply Chain, also known as Daniel Stanton,
Yeah.
was featured in this Fortune article. Companies are beginning to panic. Experts say China's lockdowns will make inflation and the supply chain nightmare even worse. And our other LP, Freight Waves, is featuring Craig. Chinese lockdowns will create shocks to American supply chains, but it's also impacting themselves. So, like I said, we are in the midst of chaos, crisis on crisis. Daniel, do you have a few words to share on what's going down in China? Unmute yourself.
Oh, he might be busy. Okay, there he
Yeah,
is.
here's the current status.
Hi.
Maya, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Hi.
Hi.
Okay.
Oh my goodness, so cute.
Wait, Maya, show your weapon. Yeah. Well, I was under attack in the middle of the conversation.
Oh, I love it.
Rita, this is good.
So
You know, we're
it's made out of a digging shovel for gardening, a balloon, and
There's a reason.
I think it's the Maya show.
Cold calling in a Zoom conference is dangerous.
We love it.
It indeed, when Shanghai first went into lockdown because of COVID about 2 weeks ago, I'll say I called it wrong because I thought it was going to be a short term, couple of days, get the supplies and the plans in place, and then reopen. But the truth is, the longer this goes on, actually, it's spread. It's become more severe. And we've seen these dynamics a few times now during COVID, where when you shut off the valve anywhere in the supply chain quickly, you may not see the results. The further away you get, you won't see them as soon, but you will see them.
Yes.
And so, the sorts of things that happen, there are a finite number of shipping containers in the world. Now they're piling up in Shanghai. And so at some point in the future, 30, 60, 90 days, we start to see you don't have the containers that you need in places like LA or Savannah, because they were stuck now in Shanghai. So at this point, I think it's reasonable to assume that supply chains are going to be really, really turbulent through the summer. And part of the reason that becomes really bad is summer is the peak season when we need to be shipping products into the US to prepare for the holiday season in December. So the problems that we're seeing in Shanghai now, not only is that, a huge issue for manufacturers today and in a month, but it could be a real issue for retailers, through the end of the year. So I think it's going to be turbulent. I think the disruption is just going to continue. And I think, it's absolutely driving prices higher, which leads to inflation.
Yeah.
How's that?
Love it. And I love your new stole.
Just this morning, there were reports in the news that Beijing might be going under lockdown too. We were preparing for this, and so I didn't have time to dig into it more, but it looks like the situation in China is going to get worse.
Yeah. So this brings us to our shores, the President's Economic Report. We have so much going on around the world, and the long and short of it, if you haven't had time to dig into this meaty document, really comes down to economic growth despite growing inflation, and how long will that continue to last? Rebuilding U.S. manufacturing, reshoring, and investment in infrastructure, which also means that you're going to have a lot of workforce development requiring reskilling and upskilling, and we're going to need innovations to get people to learn these new skills. It's not going to be fast enough if we're asking people to go back to college or some new education. There are emerging companies like Shimmy.io that have gamified key skills for the fashion industry, like digital pattern making, where she works with women in Bangladesh that have a 4th grade education. They don't read, they don't write, and they're even afraid to touch a computer screen because it's worth more than their lives in the caste system. And yet, within as little as 4 hours, she has these women learning how to do digital pattern making. This is a 6-figure salary, highly sought after here in the United States. We don't have enough people with these skills coming out of our schools. So imagine what that could do, bringing this type of gamification to reskilling and upskilling here in the US. Also, we're seeing labor unions on the rise. This is going to be a really interesting creative destruction time for our huge dare we say, monopolies that have really had their way with their workforce. The workforces are rising up, and hopefully we'll see a rebirth of the middle class as a result, actually having living wages for a full-time job. And supply chain security and resiliency, as you see in this New York Times article, Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, calls for reshaping of global supply chains that are not secure. Oh, it's like a mind-boggling that this is just now a headline. They're just now realizing this, but yay, better late than never. Supply chain security and resiliency is being made a priority. And of course, back to reshoring and advanced manufacturing. I found it really interesting because I've been Miss Localization for a number of years. But in doing research for headlines around reshoring and advanced manufacturing in the US, I found lots of general, broad articles in the big pubs, but the really meatier ones that were talking about specific, tangible projects were in local news. These two are from Ohio and Pennsylvania. So in Ohio, they're building an Industry 4.0 manufacturing facility, and in Encina is building a $1.1 billion advanced manufacturing facility in Pennsylvania, which will create 300 new jobs. So jobs that have never existed before, because these types of cyber physical automated systems have never really existed at this scale before. Lots of reshoring and advanced manufacturing that are going to create jobs, as opposed to everyone's fears that it's going to be stealing your jobs. And this also leads to the scarcity of raw materials. One of my favorite things is talking about systemic design thinking. I think that we really are seeing a massive lack of systemic design thinking when it comes to our global supply chains. This article from Protocol, that you thought the chip shortage was bad, from the Rivian CEO. He says the chip crunch would look like a small appetizer to what we're about to feel on battery cells over the next 2 decades. He anticipates shortages in every part of the battery building process, including mining raw materials like cobalt, lithium, and nickel, processing materials, and building the battery cells themselves. Put very simply, in all the world's cell production combined presents well under 10% of what we'll need in 10 years, meaning 90 to 95% of the supply chain does not exist. That should terrify people. We are trying to force industries to convert to sustainable technologies and innovations, and we haven't thought through that those transitions are actually possible because we lack the raw materials. I saw another article, I forget what pub it was in, but it stated something like even if we were to overnight be able to transition every single current automobile in the world to an electric vehicle, we would not be able to, because we just lack the raw materials.
Yeah.
So what are we doing about how are we building these things, and how can we repurpose waste streams? Because we have raw materials in old products that can be disassembled and sourced, and that brings us to circularity and reuse, recycle, repurpose. We are finally seeing that Biden also is even invoking the Defense Production Act for the EV battery materials, because it's going to impact everyone. Again, it begs the question of, if we're going to try to produce EV batteries here in the US, where are we getting those raw materials? And this also brings me to one of my other favorite topics of greenwashing and legislation. This article from Fast Company states that 68% of US execs admit their companies are guilty of greenwashing. And I got news for you. The rest of them just won't admit it. So it's 100% of companies are greenwashing. You can be assured of that. And so us drafting legislation we're far behind the rest of the world. The UK and Europe is embracing sustainable legislation and end-of-use repurposing of certain raw materials. We finally, in New York, are starting to put a toe in the water of what legislation could look like with the New York Fashion Sustainability Act. This is a huge step in the right direction, but still it comes down to pushing the amount of capital that needs to happen to support this type of innovation. And not only are the companies that are responsible for greenwashing deploying billions of dollars to support their further greenwashing because it's easier, inertia is great, and disruption hurts. And people that are in the C-suite of these huge companies, they don't want to do the bad thing. They don't want to do the wrong thing. It's just easier. And so people come along with these snake oil and hoopla of being able to make them look like they are actually doing the right thing and are responsible corporate citizens. And it's a lot easier to deploy a few $1 million into a study, a white paper that says that they are doing the right thing. But when it comes down to it, just fashion alone is lacking in early stage capital investment to the tune of 20 to 30 billion dollars needing to be deployed every year between 2020 and 2030, just in early stage, pre-seed and seed, around fashion supply chain innovations for the industry to have a remote chance of hitting the sustainability goals they've set for themselves. That's according to a BCG and Fashion for Good report that was landed in January of 2021. And that brings me to the last of my slides before I can't wait to dive into this conversation, the size of the opportunity. This visual from Visual Capitalist is a visual representation of the world's $94 trillion GDP, which runs on supply chains. And the insight that I want you all to take away from this is that according to, I think this was HSBC and who was the other org?
NBCG.
NBCG. Links are in here to the articles. The global supply chains need 100 trillion of investment by 2050 to achieve net zero. That is correct. It's not a typo. 94 trillion is what it currently is. We need to entirely replace, or as we like to say, refashion our global supply chains on which the entire world's GDP runs. That's no small undertaking, and we couldn't be more proud that REFASHION Ventures gets to play a role in this deployment of capital. And with that, I'd love to open it up to conversation. Questions, comments?
Questions, comments, complaints.
Don't make me call on you folks. You know I will.
I always have to give people the opportunity to complain.
Nitin.
Yeah, I think today morning I was talking to my psychologist at a coffee shop. He's a mentor basically, and he was saying that fashion is probably the second most polluting industry that we have. Do you have any insights on that?
So it's debatable whether it's second or third.
Okay.
You know, it really is one of the top worst. What we do know is that it is largely responsible for the amount of microplastics that humans and plants and animals are ingesting every day on this planet. There's some amazing stats on fashion that the average consumer doesn't really think about or isn't privy to, just because, you know, they don't want you to know that they're killing you. Just like the big bad oil companies, but most of your clothing is made from oil.
Right.
It's PET that goes into polyester, and when you launder polyester, or even when you wear it, just wearing it will release microparticles into the atmosphere, into the air, and you're breathing in or ingesting, drinking, and consuming up to a credit card's worth of microplastics every week.
Wow.
Our human bodies were not meant to have plastics in them. They've even found plastics, microplastics, in your bloodstream. If you thought getting rid of cholesterol was hard, imagine blockages from plastics in your veins. They've been found in your lungs, in umbilical cords, in the womb. This is, you know, obviously one of humankind's last big efforts to stay on this planet. We cannot continue the way we've been going. I'm going to hand it over to Sanam
there. Hi. I
Hi.
apologize if it's a little loud. I'm just in transit, but great presentation. Thank you all for sharing so much. And you talked a lot about your portfolio companies and what you're seeing in the market. Obviously, there's this huge opportunity. What technologies do you wish existed that don't exist now to address some of these challenges? Like, what are the opportunities out there? If you're an entrepreneur, what should you be building?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been looking for, my unicorn I'm on the hunt for, is the ability to break down fashion or any materials without needing to disassemble, sort, resort, comb, shred, whatever. Like, we can use chemistry to break down things, putting them into a giant industrialized, blender, if you will, of chemistry, and using chemistry to resort the materials within that, shall we call it, primordial soup, and have our raw materials now pre-processed and sorted without so much human intervention in that process. That is one of the things that I'm on the hunt for. I met one company out of France that is doing something in this space that I've been monitoring now for a while, and I'm hoping that this year they will be ready to disclose a bit more about this. But I think that is what's going to be needed to unlock real recycling at scale. The amount of plastics, we're all putting stuff in our bins and doing our part to sort. It's still going to landfill and incineration.
And incineration.
And we need a better way. Anything you're looking for, Brian, that you wish existed?
No, the use of waste. The use of waste to create new materials and new products, which is why advanced materials and advanced manufacturing are two areas in which we look for new investments.
Yeah. One of the things I can't underscore enough is that most venture funds are terrified of atoms. But we are not going to refashion our world without addressing that we live in a physical environment, and software alone is not going to decarbonize our planet and alleviate our plastics crisis.
Yeah, it's hard to decarbonize global supply chains without dealing with atoms. Is how I put it. So.
Great, thank you. I call it the nuts and bolts, right? The nuts and bolts of cities, the nuts and bolts of our physical infrastructure. So, thanks. Just I mentioned I'm in LA. There's a company I met over the weekend called Mars Materials. They basically take all the carbon captured from some of these companies like Charm Industrial and others, and then they reuse it, the material ACN, which is in a lot of clothing and other consumer products. But they basically replace that material, that chemical. So happy to put you in touch, given that you're on the hunt.
Yes,
yeah,
I also saw another advanced materials company this week, and I literally texted to Brian. I was like, "God, why are we need more companies like this?" So it is a replacement for styrofoam.
Yeah, for styrofoam plastic.
Using clamshells, I think it was.
Yeah, using any sort of shells from seafood.
That's what I'm talking about. We need to see that sort of stuff being used and supported for scale. But not only with advanced materials in particular, you can't just invest in the materials. You need to understand that you need to support them through infrastructure to scale. And that's why we're really across data, AI, analytics, advanced materials, advanced manufacturing, and advanced logistics, because supply chains don't exist in a silo.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, Sonam is the woman I told you about from Recast that we need to schedule a call with.
She's been singing your praises, Sonam. She's been singing your praises. Lisa has been singing your praises.
Let's see. Oh, I see Eugene on here and Spencer. So good to see so many people that we've known for so long.
Any other questions, comments? observations?
I'm going to call on someone. Linda, I know you love supply chains. What do you think of our macro environment and trends?
You know what, I want to push back a little bit, and I only heard part of it. So apologies if I misunderstood what you were saying. But I think that, especially speaking around the battery sector, one of my special areas,
Mm-hmm.
I think something that is very common in this space is financial gyrations, if not outright manipulation,
Mhm.
that simulates shortages
Yeah.
that aren't actually real. And so that's one thing, and I'd love to get into a deeper conversation with you about that. It's already in my notes to myself.
Yeah.
Because I would love to match up what we each are seeing.
Mhm.
That would be fantastic. Yeah. I think that obviously nobody likes to waste a good crisis, and crisis brings out all of the opportunists that are overinflating, price gouging, holding back capacity and raw materials to, it's an opportunity for them to thrive. And a friend of mine just posted today that she saw a bag of ice at Costco was going for $3 a couple of weeks ago, and today it was $6. She's like, really? Inflation around ice? So everything is being impacted. And I'm certain that there are companies that are holding back their resources and raw materials. And I'd love to learn more about your thoughts on that, Linda. Kelsey, you're going to be co-hosting with us which event? The June one, right?
Yeah.
June 1.
Yeah.
Everyone.
What's new at IBM?
Well, my products are within supply chain includes how do you optimize with blockchain, IoT, and AI. So iterating in those areas. Good stuff.
Did you see our graphics for our June event? I'm curious what you think. Supply chains are effed.
Yeah, and I love that. I loved your opening. It's I think that's very apt.
It'll be so much fun to see everyone in person. Peter, I don't know if you're going to be in New York in June, but it's been way too long.
Oh yeah, I marked that on my calendar. I would love to be there in person. Oh my God, I so miss New York. Wow. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I'll throw something into the discussion here too. My observation, I've been talking to lots of farmers, wheat farmers, soy farmers, hay, rice, almonds, and the general observation I'm seeing over and over again is these poor folks are not able to export their goods.
Mhm.
And it's because the ports are all hosed up, but also just they can't get containers and they can't get bookings. So I have a strong suspicion that at some point this is going to start to again hit us with hit inflation and hit our GDP. So just heads up, everybody. Anything we can do to help our farmers in particular help their goods get exported. There's a lot of tricks happening now with the containers being held back or sent back empty.
Yeah.
We really need to help our exports out.
Hey, that's a really good point. Is there anyone that you know of that is helping them maybe explore alternative within the Americas buyers so they don't have to be competing for containers or even regionalized distribution to alternative buyers?
Oh, that is such a great point, Lisa. I really appreciate you say that. Actually, that's a good point. What I will say is happening is, particularly with the situation in the world, like for example, with soy meal, a lot of that was sourced originally from Ethiopia to Europe. That's no longer available. And then Ukraine was a big producer of soy as well. And now that that's taken out of the picture, it's made the US products more valuable.
Yeah.
So what's happening is the demand is increasing for U.S. products, but yeah, you make a good point about domestic demand as well.
I think there's a huge opportunity if somebody could spin up a matching system to show where companies have purchased overseas products that they just aren't going to be getting anytime soon, and they can shift to purchasing local similar products. It may not be exactly the same, but I know from working with huge companies, just being able to source a new vendor is a freaking nightmare. and
Right.
within when was it, early on in the pandemic, I spoke to some people at Walmart, and they literally their produce on their store shelves was bare. And they're sitting there with all these local farmers and going to farmers markets where they had tons of produce, and the local
Wow.
farmers were trying to sell their produce in to solve for Walmart's bare shelves.
Wow.
And they couldn't bridge the gap. It's a systems shortage, breakage. If we had enough data and compliance and
Yes.
trustless systems, we could make more agile, resilient pivots around disasters like this.
Well,
They
well
should
said, Lisa.
they should all be using stimulus, right? Because
Yes.
that's
Yes,
what
that
that's
too.
what stimulus. That's
Yes.
precisely why we invested in stimulus. That it's a way to tap into a network of alternative sources of supply when things like this happen.
Lisa, can I jump in for 1 second?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Please, Shelley.
I wanted to give a really horrifying example of how this works in a humanitarian situation. Imagine that there were local products that were needed in, let's say, Ukraine, but it was another country at the time, critical resources that were needed. But it turned out the only place they could find them, these big NGOs, was actually in Copenhagen. And it turned out that each item, I don't know what minor item it was, ended up costing as much as a first class ticket for each item to get sent back into the local economy, whereas in every local economy, unless it's been totally destroyed by nuclear, they could produce these things and probably already have factories that could. But this is a typical humanitarian supply chain problem, but it sounds very much like what we're talking about in this whole cycle of local farmers and localization and getting things closest to where they're needed.
Yep. Yeah, agility, resiliency, redundancy. When I first started doing my research, I took a year off to research fashion supply chains after founding the New York Fashion Tech Lab, because I realized the C-suite executives weren't making the hardest decisions to invest in the meaningful technologies that would actually change their business impact on people, planet, and profits. So spending a year really digging in, I realized, there are amazing opportunities afforded by distributed collaborative networks. We see it in blockchain, crypto, Web3. It's created this trustless, authenticated conveyance of value. What if we made that physical and applied it to our systems and infrastructure? And that really has been my focus since 2015 through localization, creating a distributed collaborative network that has authentication or trustless authentication, agility, resiliency, and redundancy that is needed in especially a time of crisis. And the only thing that we all can guarantee is 100% part of our future is more crisis. Because right now, everything that's going on in our world, well, except for the war in Ukraine, is a symptom of the climate crisis. And unless we fully address that, we're never going to be out of this constant risk.
Lisa, maybe to wrap up, and I hope Spencer doesn't get upset at me for putting him on the spot without warning. but we talked about what Revere VC is doing, and perhaps Spencer can talk a little bit about the platform they've been building and give a preview of when it will be live to the public. Spencer, if you want to unmute yourself and maybe come on camera, assuming you can, of course. It just occurred to me
He's
that
like,
this would
dude, I just got out of the shower.
it just occurred to me that this would be a good way to wrap up the call.
Or not, no pressure.
Yeah, there's no pressure.
Yeah, maybe he
Yeah,
is
maybe
someplace that he can't.
he's tied up. But we'll at least share the ratings report that Spencer and the team at Revere have sent us.
Hey,
Oh, hi
There he is.
Spencer.
guys, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Sorry, one more time. I just stepped away.
Oh, I was just saying to wrap up in the few minutes that we have, would you want to give us a preview about what you've been up to at Revere?
Absolutely. So give me 2 seconds real quick to pull it up. But basically what we have been doing at Revere is, as we were cultivating our client base of family offices and registered investment advisors, kind of focused in that $100 million to $1 billion range, we found that a lot of them have a mandate to invest in VC, but they can't afford to get into the Sequoias and the Andreessens of the world. So they have to get pointed towards emerging managers. The issue is they don't know how to find and evaluate these managers, and a bit off of aspects outside of track record and relationship. So what we had done was we took our collective experience, either allocating capital, hold on just a second, either allocating capital at the LP level or at the GP level, and understanding this is what the family officer are going to be looking for. Can everybody see my desktop?
No, it
no,
came
we
up and then
can't.
disappeared. Oh,
Yeah,
now we can.
Now we can.
Okay, cool. So what we did was we created a ratings report based off of a lot of the qualitative values that we see in emerging managers. And so we condensed it into a 12-page report, generally sounding like a Morningstar type review, where we take our general overview of, hey, what do we think of this company, the sector, the fit, and how do we put a personalized spin on it to highlight a lot of the things that are not coming up in these LP meetings that they do still care about. And so this was the run through that we did for Refashioned. And the 5 categories that we really looked at were the team makeup, historical track record, firm management, sourcing, and value add. And what this does as an LP is I can say, okay, well, I'm typically asking for what is the track record? What are the figures? But in a small team like Refashioned, really that value add comes from that post-investment. What do we do to help our portfolio companies grow? And so now, as I'm an emerging manager, I can go through and say, hey, this third party said that my value add is on the higher side, that 4.13 out of 5, saying I give solid guidance to our companies, solid help with the revenue generation, great with the community building, especially in putting together the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation. These are things that often get missed in some of these high-level LP conversations that we really want to highlight, that we think is going to drive a lot more capital to emerging managers.
Awesome.
That's
Thank you so
awesome.
much for
Thank
tooting
you.
our horn for us, Spencer.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for being helpful and transparent.
Thank you. No, we're excited about the launch, and like I said, let us know what we can do to help get the word out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for giving us a platform here.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We will be posting this video to our YouTube and sending that out along with the PDF that I presented today. With that, I will bid you all adieu. Happy Monday.
Thank you.
Bye.